Hello, people of the internet. My name is JD Shadow. There's not a lot of times I get to talk about Joe Rogan here on this channel, though I do listen to him a good bit. I do disagree with some of the things he says. I agree with a lot of things he says, because it does seem as though that even though you're free to agree or disagree, it seems as though the points and opinions that he makes are his own. He's not getting sold out by another conglomerate, although you can have your opinions about his latest deal with Spotify and if that has anything to do with whether or not he's getting censored or not. And there's a lot of debate about what's going on there. I know very little about that aspect, although I haven't listened to him as much since he's went on to Spotify because I don't really have time to do a whole lot, and listening to a 3-hour podcast is not something that I can really do on a day-to-day basis. So I try to pick and choose which ones that I do listen to. If there's something that they talk about that is interesting to me, I will go and listen to it, and I'll listen to the guests as well. And I do understand that he gets into a lot of trouble because he's not afraid to say the kinds of things that he does say about transgenders in sports, about the controversies that go on there, and of course the one we're going to be talking about today, the COVID regulations and the COVID restrictions. Now, of course, YouTube likes to be YouTube about this. I'm not going to censor myself here, so if you like what you hear, you like what you see, please hit that subscribe button, hit that comment button, and comment on what you think about today's video and what you think about me in general by hitting that like button. And by the way, if you hit unlike, it does not bury the video in any sort of way. It is fan engagement. It helps me out either way. So don't think you're burying the video by hitting dislike. You're just doing me a favor there. It is not like Reddit. In any event, Joe Rogan has triggered a good bit of people because of his stances about COVID and about masks and about vaccines. Case in point, his more than recent episode with Dave Smith. He's a stand-up comedian and a political commentator according to the episode description. Before I go any further, I do want to preface this by saying that stand-up comedians can be smart as well. I don't understand this concept that if you are an entertainer or you're somebody who is a comedian or an actor or something like that, that you are supposed to be stupid and you're supposed to keep your mouth shut about political topics. Yeah, there's a difference between having your own opinion and trying to force something down another person's throat. I think there's a firm difference between the two. And the people that go on a Joe Rogan Experience are usually those that just want to have a conversation instead of saying, hey, I'm right all the time, and if you don't agree with me, you are a horrific person. So I do not understand why people tend to think that. Yes, there is a difference, but at the same time, they are free to go on something like Joe Rogan Experience and actually talk about what they do believe in, shoot the breeze with a person who might have disagreements with them, but will let them express their viewpoint no matter how ridiculous or how thoughtful it might be. But Joe Rogan is more of a centrist, and that rubs a lot of people both left and right the wrong way, because if you believe what John Cleese said about the political sides, the one group of people they both hate is moderates. They absolutely despise moderates, and the reason why is because they know that moderates have the tendency to think that if the other side, the opposing side, has a good point, they will actually agree with them. That they cannot say, hey, you have to stay with our side. They have the tendency to kind of go the other way if it seems as though they feel as though the other candidate has a better plan. So with that in mind, where am I going with this? Well, one of the groups of people that have actually not liked Joe Rogan is the media, because of course Joe Rogan goes after the media. He does criticize the media. And you know how the media tries to counteract this? They will find whatever they can to vilify that person without telling you that the real reason they're going after that person is because they criticize the media. And yes, both sides do it. MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, they do that all the time. But it's not just them. It is the blog posting. And this is where we get to what Joe Rogan said on this podcast. Now, we're going to first talk about what the media claims he had said. Then we'll get to what he actually said. And then what this whole thing is really about. Because I don't think anybody who has covered this, which is not very many, I do believe Jeremy Hamblin, the quartering, somebody who I don't agree with a whole hell of a lot, but I do agree with some of his takes as well. As somebody who's a bit more moderate left wing, I believe I have the capacity to do that. But I don't think he touched upon what this could all really be about, because there's some additional context to all of this that I don't think even those in the media who were more fair to Joe Rogan were actually saying. So let's first of all get to what the media claims he said. What they claimed he said, that healthy young people should not get a coronavirus vaccine. That is not exactly what he said, although some of those headlines are saying it, and then they go into detail about what he actually said. And then they decide that they're going to put their own opinions into the article where they're supposed to be unbiased. And the reason why I say this is because of the real reason why these media outlets are going after Joe Rogan. The real reason that they're trying to do this hit piece right now. Because what he actually said is something that I'm going to actually play for you, and I am going to warn you that this does have some profanity and some offending language in it. However, it is important that we hear what the entire conversation was all about. Here was what was said in that episode.
Get vaccinated if you're vulnerable. I think you should get vaccinated if you feel like my parents are vaccinated. I've encouraged a lot of people to get, and people say, do you think it's safe to get vaccinated? I've said, yeah, I think for the most part it's safe to get vaccinated. I do. But if you're like 21 years old and you say to me, should I get vaccinated? I go, no. Yeah. Are you healthy? Are you a healthy person? Like, look, don't do anything stupid, but you should take care of yourself. You should, if you're a healthy person and you're exercising all the time and you're young and you're eating well, and like, I don't think you need to worry about this.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you.
But there's a lot of jobs that will tell you need to have this.
Well, that's what's starting to happen now.
People are worried about them doing it for their children. And we talked about this earlier. There's that you might have to have your children vaccinated. And, you know, I can tell you as someone who's both my children got the virus, it was nothing. I mean, I hate to say that. If someone's children died from this, I'm very sorry that happened. I'm not in any way diminishing that. But I'm saying the personal experience that my children had with COVID was nothing. One of the kids had a headache. The other one didn't feel good for a couple days. Yeah. Like, maybe, I mean, not feel good, like no big deal. No coughing, right. no achy, no like in agony. There was none of that. It was very mild. It was akin to them getting a cold.
Yeah, and you can have this thing where it's like you were saying, this virtue signaling and this kind of like theatrical display of I get the vaccine, what a good person I am, I care about everyone. But you're like, look, my daughter's a lot younger than your kids, but I'm like, yeah, I'm not injecting my daughter with something to fucking virtue signal. Right. Like, I'm not doing that. Right. If there's something that she's of no risk, statistically has no risk from, right. I'm sorry, I'm not taking any experiment on her in that. And that's my attitude toward it.
But it's amazing that that's controversial.
Yeah.
That even saying that, I'm not going to inject my child with the vaccine, is controversial. Yeah. It's crazy. Because, again, we are not talking about even the flu that we just found out killed 22,000 people last year. We're not talking about that.
Right.
We're talking about something that is not statistically dangerous for children.
Now, of course, the hand-picked medical experts, quote-unquote, that the media loves to tout, including Dr. Fauci, which I'm not quite sure why he keeps going on all the time and contradicting things that would make people not want to get a vaccine if they don't know that it's actually going to help end the pandemic. Something that we really want to have happen. But of course, somebody whose entire media exposure depends on whether or not they believe him and only him to deliver all the answers is going to say something like that and is going to try to talk down or try to scold or going to try to discredit anybody who might have a different perspective of what could be going on, regardless of whether or not they would be a quote-unquote expert. Those are the people that the media allowed to have a voice in their articles stating that Joe Rogan does not know what he's talking about because, oh, he's just an MMA fighter, or, oh, he's just a comedian, he's not a medical expert. But he is a commentator. That is his job to do that in order to analyze what people are saying from a real person perspective, from somebody who is listening to it and trying to figure out what that means from his perspective, from the perspective of a normal person. Now, of course, a normal person who makes a lot of money out of the Spotify deal. However, I don't think he's really changed his opinions that much because of the Spotify deal. But back to this whole thing, I've seen some people attempt to dispute even the whole idea about children getting vaccinated. Media Matters for America is saying that there is no FDA approved vaccination for children, although that is kind of being tested right now. However, Joe never actually said that children would be vaccinated. He said that people would want children to be vaccinated. There's a little bit of a difference there between what he said and what the media is claiming he said. And of course, because we're all headline skimmers, we don't actually read anything past the headlines, we will never be able to fully take in what he actually said to begin with, because, of course, we are all knee-jerking about what he might have said, not what he actually said. And then, of course, comes the people who write these articles, especially the one in CNET, saying, oh, well, he's wrong. It is not your place in an article. If you're writing the article, it's not your place unless you are saying to us that you are somebody who is supposed to give us your opinion of what was said, to tell us what you believe. Now, if you're saying you're basing that on facts, then show us your facts. Show us what you have seen and not just the confirmation bias that we're getting from the media right now, in order to show us that he is completely factually wrong on every point that he has made. We have not seen that yet. And these medical health experts, or the health experts that are in the White House right now, are asking for him to walk back those statements. I don't think it's going to do that, because there's a such thing as free thinking. We are allowed to think for ourselves. I think even though he is claimed to be a very influential person in the world of podcasts, that we are able to think for ourselves. If we think that he is wrong, then we have every ability to say, hey, we disagree. But we should hear all sides out. We should be able to get all the information, not just the stuff that the media says that we are allowed to get. If there are medical experts, okay, fine. Let's have all the medical experts. Let's not just have the medical experts that you approve, that confirm your bias, that confirm what you want to believe, so you can have this weaponized for another purpose. No matter if it's for the right-wing purposes or the left-wing purposes. It doesn't matter to me. I don't want it to be politicized by either party. And yes, the left wing is politicizing this as well as the right wing is. Please stop denying that the left wing isn't doing that, because it clearly is. Because I haven't told you what this might really be about, because this whole conversation, the one that everybody's saying, oh, run it back, Joe, walk this back, Joe, is taken out of context of another conversation that they were having. And here it is, the real reason why the media is now attacking Joe in droves. I'm gonna play the full clip for you, and this part was before the quotes that you're seeing out of the media. Once again, this has a bit of profanity in it, but please listen to the whole thing, because it's going to give you a whole hell of a lot of context. And the only thing that I might cut out is the parts where he's talking about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine giving the blood clots. And the only reason I'm doing that is because I don't want this to get copyright flagged, because I'm using a whole lot of the clip. But it's important for us to get the full context. Maybe they'll post it on the Powerful JRE YouTube channel, where they sometimes post full-on clips. That way we hear the entire conversation, and it's just the clips that people want to pick and choose from in order to villainize somebody who will also say things like this.
Well, I think that the science is pretty clear that if you don't have major underlying health issues and you have a strong immune system, you have nothing to worry about with COVID.
But if you say that, people will go bananas and say, why aren't you vaccinated?
I know. People have developed an emotional stock in this worldview now. And that's going to have to be broken if we're going to be okay.
And dude, I'm not even against being vaccinated. I'm not. I'm confused about this narrative, and I'm confused why people can't look at this nuanced. But there was a moment where the UFC had allocated a certain amount of vaccines, and I said, okay, save one for me. And I went down to the UFC to do the fights, and I thought I'd be able to get it there. And they said, no, there was been a misunderstanding. You're going to have to come back on Monday. And I said, shit, I can't come back on Monday. I said, all right, well, we'll figure this out. So I didn't get vaccinated, and that was the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and they pulled it off the market because blood clots.
Which also seemed like, to be honest, seemed like a very small number of blood clots. It was something like a few cases in millions of doses. I don't know, but it's like, you know, you have Dr. Fauci out there for a while, like, no, don't wear a mask. That's ridiculous. And then it's like, what? You're not wearing a mask? You're an insane person.
Now he's wearing two.
Yeah, they're wearing two after being vaccinated, you know? And then, so they're literally going there, like, it's like one day, literally one day at noon, you're a kook if you question the vaccines.
Yeah.
And the next day at noon, they're like, well, we're pulling this vaccine because there's been all these health problems. Like, but just yesterday, you weren't even allowed to question whether there were health problems related to the vaccine.
Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying have a great podcast, so the Dark Horse podcast. And, you know, he's an evolutionary biologist, and so is she. They're brilliant people. They were talking about this, the narrative about the vaccines, about whether or not the vaccines are safe. And that this is not even something that you're allowed to have a discussion about. And that is so strange. There's nothing else where you can have a discussion about whether or not it's okay to get an injection of something into your body. Like this is a really weird thing where you're supposed to, it's almost like people don't want to think that maybe there could be something dangerous ever about not just a vaccine, but any kind of a drug that you get injected in your body. So because this is so critical, they want you to play make-believe with them and say there's no risks.
And that we have to have this unbelievable faith in all of these establishment institutions. That, well, of course they got it right. I mean, they wouldn't be rolling it out this way unless they got it right, you know? And that's why we're all going to do this thing. Brian Stelter at CNN was criticizing Fox News because their hosts have not been publicly getting the vaccine.
Yes,
they're not taking pictures on air of them which, first of all, if nothing else, can we all acknowledge that that's weird?
Yes.
It is weird. Like, objectively, it is weird to be putting out pictures of you getting a vaccine in this almost like ceremonial kind of like thing. Like, it's very weird. And then you're going like, okay, well, look, these vaccines were developed very quickly. There is huge money that's being made here by these big pharmaceutical companies, right? Are we not allowed to be skeptical of any of this, to ask questions about this? Like, who's getting money? Is it really appropriate for, say, CNN to be just shilling for big pharmaceutical companies? Like, we're taking pictures of us taking your product, and now we're chastising others for not taking pictures of it. How about medical privacy? Like,
you're putting social
so
pressure
weird
on people. You're putting social pressure on people, and you're also virtue signaling in the most obvious of social media ways. Like, you're actually saying it like it's a virtue. You're saying it like it's a good thing that people display the fact that they're being compliant and they're doing this.
Yeah, it gives me the creeps. The whole thing is very creepy.
I think you should.
So here's the thing. Outside the whole idea that he's giving a real world opinion, not something that was formulated by medical experts that only get approved if the media says that, hey, you're saying what we want people to hear, not what they need to hear. So let's put you guys out there instead of having a debate among medical experts that might have a different opinion about what we should do about the COVID-19 pandemic, and people that dismiss the whole idea of vitamin D and the lack of vitamin D being an issue with people who get the COVID-19 virus, versus let's wear a mask everywhere, even if you do get vaccinated. Outside of all of that, this has everything to do about the media's response to people who dare to criticize anything about our response. Not necessarily those people who say, oh, the COVID-19 is just a hoax. No one on the JRE podcast ever said this. And to their credit, most of the media is not saying that he believes it's a hoax. But the real issue, the real reason why many in the media are attacking Joe Rogan right now is because Joe Rogan called out the people in the media who are attacking those who dare to criticize even the slightest letter of what they're being told is the right response. And we have seen this time and time again, especially on the r/coronavirus subreddit, that if you say that something like somebody being tasered for not wearing a mask when they're socially distant, or somebody who has a problem with their 2-year-old toddler not being able to wear a mask on an airplane being kicked out, if you say, hey, that's a little out of line, you get dogpiled by the most insane group of people and you get downvoted. Yeah, it got a little better for a little while, and then the governor of Texas decided to lift the mask mandates, and here they all came again. And you see this happen time after time again. This is the part that was the real discussion on that podcast. Not necessarily the vaccinations, which he might have a point about. If you go on the r/COVID-19, a more scientific subreddit, you will see that there is growing evidence of vitamin D and unhealthy immune systems contributing to how bad somebody might have the COVID-19 virus or have the disease, or how well they're able to recover. And yes, there are outliers, there are exceptions to the rule, but how about the ratio of those people who are healthy, 21 years of age, who are young and healthy, who have gotten the virus and have recovered to the fullest extent that their body is able to do so? Again, we're talking about a virus that can have a bit of a lasting effect, as all viruses might. And yes, I have covered this before. You can go watch my previous videos on the subject. You can see it in the title card that I'm about to show you right now, that there are several experts who might say something to the contrary that get banned from these subreddits because they're quote-unquote providing misinformation. What are you considering misinformation? Those that are not touting what you want people to hear? That is ludicrous. That is unfair to the general public who just wants to hear the truth. And if you're going to villainize Joe Rogan for these comments, how about also villainizing Bill Maher for his new rule segment in which he asked for doctors to tell it to him straight about the COVID-19 vaccinations and about the COVID-19 virus? Because he might have said kind of the same thing, just not as bluntly as Joe has said. And yes, he gets attacked by people like Reset Era and some people on the extreme left-wing side as well. Or how about you criticize or even mention Brett Weinstein and Heather Hine, the two people who Joe Rogan had mentioned on his podcast, and says that he listened to the Dark Horse podcast, in which, by the way, they did mention something about exactly what Joe Rogan was talking about, and which the people in the media and people on YouTube and most likely on the subreddits probably did the same thing to Joe Rogan that Facebook obviously did with Brett Weinstein when he had Gerrit Van Broadsheets on their podcast to talk about the possibility that the vaccines could quote-unquote drive the evolution of escape mutants. I have no idea what that's all about, but given the possibility that there are certain experts that are being censored, Gerrit, according to Brett Weinstein, is somebody who should know what he's talking about. He listed off a good bit of qualifications he has in order to be qualified to talk about such subjects, but I didn't catch it all the way. I will link to you the podcast episode of Dark Horse podcast livestream, in which I believe they go into full discussion about the same thing that Joe Rogan was talking about in the description below this video. But if you want to criticize someone for something that Joe Rogan might have said in this particular episode, why don't you go to the source of information? Why are you scared of bringing Brett Weinstein and Heather Hine onto your news programs, MSNBC and CNN and Fox? Why don't you do that? Why don't you bring them onto your podcast or onto your YouTube channels, Young Turks? why don't you do that? Are you scared that they might say something that goes against the agenda that you're setting forth in order to keep people watching your shows and giving you ratings? Or gives money to your sponsors in which they can then give money to your programs? This is called being critical. Yet what you're doing to Joe Rogan and essentially to Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying is that you're criticizing them for criticizing them by vilifying them without giving the public any information about what you're actually concerned about. You're not even telling anybody, you're not even being transparent, you're making sure you keep that hidden because if they knew, they would be just as cynical and as critical as Brett Weinstein, Heather Heying, and Joe Rogan have been to your message. Not saying they're anti-vax, no one said that. And do you really know what Joe was saying to begin with? For all we know, Joe was probably just saying, hey, 21-year-olds who are taking care of their bodies, who are taking care of their immune systems. Funny how the media tends to ignore that whole important detail of the quote he said. Then maybe you don't have to rush out to get it right away because it may be mild for you if you actually do catch it. But of course, leave it to the media and the general public and those people on Wolf's Gold portions of subreddits and on social media in order to knee-jerk things in order to either get a reaction or to virtue signal, which is a very real thing that's going on right now. Can't just ignore stuff like that or woke scolds or cancel culture just because it is rather inconvenient for you to bring up and to damage your quote-unquote side. Because if you can't call out your own side when they're screwing up, how in the world are you able to call out the opposing side when they do so? If you don't have the courage to call out your own side, then you're far from having the necessary courage to call out the other side when they screw up. However, being critical and being cynical and being skeptical is a part of the process. That's how we get to scientific facts. That's how we get to the conclusions. If you're not allowed to ask questions, then you shouldn't be in the scientific field. And if the media is trying to not only keep these people hidden from our view, but then to vilify anybody who dares to call them out on this kind of behavior, then they should take a good long look in the mirror because they should be ashamed of themselves of what they're trying to accomplish. And nobody in social media should be allowed to censor these alternative viewpoints just because they feel as though it's misinformation. Trust me, if we see something that's out of left field, like the 5G thing, we're gonna call it out too. But don't just blindly call something misinformation and go to a random website that tells you what you want to hear just because it goes against of your political beliefs or your financial goals. This is a growing concern that people have about the messaging that people are getting from our elected officials about what the experts are saying. And are we getting every expert that we can possibly have to comment about what exactly we're experiencing? And yes, we've all heard of the experts. We've all heard what the experts are saying, but we've also might have personal experiences. And we are allowed to comment on those as well. We are allowed to say, hey, my kid or somebody I know has caught this as well, and they came out of it just fine. That does not mean that I don't feel bad about the people who have lost their lives to this horrible disease or this horrible illness. That does not mean that I don't feel sympathy for that. It just says that perhaps it's affecting people a lot worse than it does for other people. And we still have no concrete evidence of how contagious asymptomatic people are in relation to how they can affect other people and if they will get sick from somebody who's asymptomatic. We have some parts of the story, but we don't seem to have the full, final, concrete story on that. And that's because we are not allowed to hear every expert. Like I said, go on a subreddit like r/lockdowncriticalleft and see some of the things that they post. And I will assure you that you're not going to get that type of information from r/coronavirus. You're not going to get that type of information from the woke skulls on Twitter. You're not going to hear that from any mainstream media outlet. And I don't understand why. But even if you disagree with everything I just said about the virus or about what I just said all in all, the fact of the matter is that this is about the attack that Joe had on the media and the responses that people have, the craziness of the woke skulls, that the left and the right wing are politicizing something that should not be politicized at all. The left and right wing are politicizing what the experts are saying. They're politicizing and determining who gets airtime, which expert gets airtime, in order to facilitate their political beliefs. And of course, the media is going to do the same thing because of what Bill Maher said. Yeah, let's go to Bill Maher again. The media has been wanting something like this for years because they are able to keep the people at home to watch their other programming. That does not mean that I think the virus is not real. That does not mean anything other than the fact that I think people are weaponizing the situation. And the media did the one thing that it has always done when they see themselves be attacked. They go after the person and they find the one thing that they know the mainstream public will be able to get on their side about without informing the public that the real reason why they are attacking Joe is because he dared to question the response that the media and the woke skull public, the woke skull social media that inhabits Twitter and Reddit about the response. And no matter what you may think about the answers that Joe, or maybe even the guest that he had on, no matter what you may think about what their stance is, the fact of the matter is that they should be allowed to ask that question. They should be allowed to be critical. They should be allowed to be cynical or to be skeptical. And maybe someone would go on and say, hey, there's nothing to be concerned about. But instead, we're getting villainized for asking the question. We're getting villainized for even saying that we are skeptical or we are critical. Not that we're going to be anti-vax or we're not going to end up taking the vaccine anyway. Maybe you should. But the fact of the matter is that you should be allowed to have a question if you feel as though you are not convinced. And nobody should take you asking a question as you doubting the vaccine. Maybe they should, but maybe it's because you have a legitimate concern. They shouldn't dismiss every single concern as illegitimate. They should encourage people to take vaccines. They should encourage people to do that. And the way you encourage people to take this vaccine is by continuing to answer the questions as an expert, as a professional expert would. If you call yourselves experts, if you call yourselves medical experts, treat us like you would somebody who's coming to you as a patient. Stop shaming us for doing that. That's what we should be doing. Because when we are skeptical, when we are critical, that's when we get the real answers. And maybe that's how we get to a point where we say, hey, this is safe. We should be taking this. Maybe that's where we have to go. Maybe that's how we get to that point. But let us get to that point. That's what the whole conversation was actually about. And I challenge anybody to prove me otherwise. That this was not about the media trying to villainize Joe because he criticized them, or he and whoever guest it was, or whoever guest that he has on, dared to criticize the responses of it, or dared to be skeptical, or be critical, or to ask a question about it. I hope I gave you some thought for the day. If I did, please give a like down below, and give me your comments about what you thought about it. If you are new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. I do hot takes about this kind of stuff a lot. There might be some things that I might be doing in the future, so please be watchful of that as I progress through my channel and try to get back to making videos on a daily basis, or as much of a basis as I possibly can. And I promise not every single video I make is going to be about these heavy topics. I want to do more lighter topics than this, but unfortunately someone's got to be the person that brings stuff like this up, because I hope that I'm bringing something to the table that no one has thought of yet. My name is JD Shadow. That just happened.